Okay, so we are on Masechet Beitzah Daf Daled Amud Bet. Continuing on from yesterday, again we're in the middle of the three cases where there's a machloket amoraim between Rav and somebody else regarding 2 consecutive days of kedusha. An egg which was laid on the first day, is it going to be muktzah on the second day as well? So the first case was Shabbat and Yom Tov, we discussed yesterday and previously. Second case, which we're on now, is what happens when you have 2 days of Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galiot, right? So if we pick up 3 lines from the end of the narrow lines in Daf Daled Amud Bet, Itma, Shnei Yom Tovim Shel Galiot, Rav Amar Noda B'zeh Muteret B'zeh, Rav Asi Amar Noda B'zeh Asura B'zeh. So we said if it's the egg is laid on the first day of Yom Tov, Rav says it's now going to be permitted on the second day of Yom Tov, and this is how we paskin. Rav Asi says no, it's still going to be forbidden on the second day. So why does Rav Asi hold that way? Suggests the Gemara, maybe he holds the 2 days together are one kedusha, one extended kedusha. Says the Gemara, that can't be the case because Rav Asi, in fact, did not hold its kedusha achat. He did havdalah between Yom Tov Rishon and Yom Tov Sheni. Says Rashi. Lema kasavar Rav Asi kedusha achat. Chachamim kav'um al bnei gola lasotam ledorot mechmat safek zeh v'tilum alehem kachom yom aroch. This is essentially the question that it boils down to. We know that initially the Yom Tov Sheni was out of safek, as we discussed yesterday, and the Gemara will discuss more. The truth is that quite early on already, people don't realize this, but quite early on already in the days of the Amoraim, the safek was not there. There was a time when it was very clear, whether it was by the cheshbon or however it was, people knew when Rosh Chodesh was, when it was meant to be at least. We know if you go through the Rambam in Hilchot Kiddush HaChodesh as well, that there are certain instances whereby even if the Eidim don't come, Beit Din still has the authority to establish the Mun, or as the Gemara Masechet Rosh Hashanah goes through, that they had a cheshbon and they knew when Rosh Chodesh was meant to be, and they would interrogate the Eidim, they would investigate them. And it might be that the Eidim come, but the Beit Din knows it's not meant to be the day of Rosh Chodesh, and they would disqualify their testimony. So it's not just based on the testimony, but in any event, that is at this stage in history, that is the primary method of being Mekadesh HaChodesh. So it was initially because of Safek. The question is, once it's no longer done out of Safek, once we have a fixed calendar, once we know when the calendar is meant to be, as I say, this extends all the way back to the Tkufa of the Amoraim. But in any event, the question is then, do we still treat it as a safek, as it was initially? Or do we say now Chachamim have made it a fixed establishment that there are going to be 2 days of Yom Tov? Nowadays, there's no safek. Nowadays, we know exactly when Yom Tov's meant to be. So maybe we treat it all as one long day. That's essentially the question here. So again, Rashi said, Chachamim kvaum al bnei gola lasotam, that the stage has established it for the bnei gola lasotam ledorot, that it should be this way for all generations. Because of the initial doubt. So maybe because they established it based on initially there was the doubt, but now that it's a fixed takana, maybe we view it as one long day. So that's how the Gemara initially says regarding Rav Asi. By the way, we're going to see, and for slightly different reasons, but that is what we say regarding Rosh Hashanah. But this is the other Yom Tov Sheni. So initially we say maybe Rav Asi holds that it's one long day, and then it says the Gemara, but V'har Rav Asi mavdil, he would make havdalah between Yom Tov Rishon and Sheni. Says Rashi, u'mavarech hamavdil ben kodesh lachol. So it says that havdalah is the bracha v'mavdil ben kodesh lachol. The kasavar kimlan bekviyah de yarcha v'Yom Tov Sheni chol gamur. Since Rav Asi held, since we know when the new moon is established, we know when Rosh Chodesh is, and therefore Yom Tov Sheni is actually chol. There's no longer any safek. Mishum minhag avotenu. So why, as the Gemara is going to say in a few lines time, why do we still keep Yom Tov Sheni anyway? Because of minhag avotenu. Shelo yadu b'kviyat hachodesh kamonu. At a certain time, they did not know about it. V'asur misafek, and they made it out of safek. By the way, whenever the Gemara says, and when Rashi says over here, he says Anan, what's the phrase? Kimnan bekvia de yarcha, or anan bekia de bekvia de yarcha means we know how it's established. So it could refer to, again, depending on when historically, the different periods of this. There was a period when we say bekian bekvia de yarcha, just means that those people, those sages, knew the astronomical calculations or wherever they were, even though they didn't have the information yet from the Beitim, but they knew when it was meant to be, and therefore they could rest assured that that was the right time of Yom Tov. Nowadays, it's not that we know, nowadays it's that we have a fixed calendar. So continues Rashi. Right, שלא ידעו בקביעת החודש כמונו, ועשו מספק מעליהן, אנחנו עושים אותם. They did it out of safek, but we do it as a continuing on from their minhag. So therefore there is no safek for us. So therefore the second day is actually chol. So we treat it as Yom Tov because of the safek, but Rav Asi would make havdalah between Yom Tov Rishon and Sheni. Amazing. So says the Gemara, Rav Asi mavdil miyom hatav lechavrei. So we couldn't have held. So why does he say that this Beitzah shenoda on Yom Tov Rishon is asura on Yom Tov Sheni? Continues the Gemara. Rav Asi shvukei mesapkele. Rav Asi had a safek, meaning he didn't say that he had a safek when Yom Tov was. He had a safek. How do we relate to Yom Tov Sheni? Do we relate to it as, since initially they related to it as a safek? So therefore, even though for us we know when the calendar is, we know it's not a safek anymore, but we still relate to it in the way that they related to it, and therefore we treat it as if it might still be Yom Tov, so we treat it as one long day. Or do we say, no, now that we know, now there's no safek, we're only keeping it because of minhag avotenu, so therefore we can relate to the second day as chol gamor for this instance. So that was the safek of Rav Asi. Let me just read Rashi for you, and then I'll take a question. So Rashi says, what was his doubt? Im chok chachamimu if it's a fixed establishment for all generations on the Galuyot, even if there will be those sages who will know how to work out the calendar, nonetheless, you still have to do it for 2 days. So that would seem to indicate that Chazal have established it as one long day. Or if you're just doing it because of the safek, and therefore we can treat one as chol, and the one who knows the way the calculations should work out would have to do havdalah. In other words, Rav Asi wasn't sure. Rav Asi says, I know what the calendar is. I know when the new moon's meant to be. Therefore, I can do havdalah from Yom Tov Rishon to Sheni. But nonetheless, because Chachamim established it, maybe still have to keep Yom Tov Sheni as well. So it'd be the chumrah in both directions. That's what the Gemara says. Avirachi lechumrah, v'hacha lechumrah. Yeah,
Excuse me. Rav Asi said that he does not have a safek because b'derech klal, if you have a question with brachot, you don't make the bracha. Or did he make the bracha without Shem and Malchus? You don't know. You weren't there. I understand.
You're saying because why do we not say Sveik brachot lakel?
Yeah.
Because the bracha of
obviously he had no safek, right? He said he just said he doesn't have a safek that the second day is chol. We just have it because minhag is going to be adenu. Well, that's the same thing now, right?
Right. Nowadays, for sure, the Gemara is going to say a little bit later on. Nowadays, for sure, we do it because of minhag avotenu b'yadeinu.
No, we have a set calendar. We know when Yontif is. We know when Rosh Hashanah is.
Right. Look, the implication from Rashi here seems to be. We have to check this out further, but it seems to be this is not. He's not talking about a time of a fixed calendar. The implication seems to be that this is still a time when it's done via Kiddush HaChodesh. So we know when it is. We know when it is means we know Yodei B'nai, meaning they know how, Rav Asi knows how to calculate it, and therefore he doesn't have to take the safek. But in any event,
he still celebrated the second day Yontif as a Yontif.
Yes. So that's what the Gemara says. It's Chumrah this way and Chumrah that way. And that's why not only does he celebrate the second day as a Yom Tov, so yeah, it does. It works out very, very strange. Rav Asi did havdalah between the end of Yom Tov Rishon, and then he carried on making Kiddush for Yom Tov Sheni. Seemingly that's what comes out. But he says that the Beitzah, which is Noda b'Yom Tov Rishon, is still going to be Asura b'Yom Tov Sheni, which is a tremendous chumrah. But that is
he made Havdalah part of Kiddush?
What?
He made Havdalah part of Kiddush?
I don't know. Maybe Yaknaz. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. But Chumra Lakan v'Chumra Lakan. Yeah, it seems a little bit strange, but that's what the Gemara says. Okay. So now, so again, but all of that was to explain why Rav Asi says that Beitzah Shenoda B'zeh that was laid on the first day of Yom Tov is going to be Asura on Yom Tov Sheni, and like Rav was it's mutar. So says the Gemara, Marbi Zeira, Kvatei Rav Asi Mistabla, De'aidna Yadinan B'Kviyah Deyalcha V'Kavdinan Tlei Yomeh. So Rabbi Zeira says Rav Asi's opinion makes sense. He says like Rav Asi makes sense, Mistabra. Why? Because now we know when Rosh Chodesh is meant to be. Right, so Rashi says over here, that it should be forbidden. He says, Kimlan b'kviyah deyarcha, Rashi, ayedei cheshbon, shemachashvin tolato, anu lamedim, nireh b'yom shloshim imlav. We work out the calculation, and we know if the moon was seen on the 30th day or not. And since we know, but nonetheless, for Kavdin and Treyome, we keep 2 days, so it's not 2 days out of Safek, but it's 2 days out of fixed takana. So therefore, we should treat it as 1 long day for the inyan of the Beitzah. That is Rabbi Zeira's opinion, following Rav Asi. Amar Abaye, on the fourth wide line of the Gemara now, says Abaye, no, Vatei the Rav mistabra, and we know already the Gemara says we pass like Rav. Says Abaye, no, it makes sense like Rav. Why? Again, Rav says if it's Noda B'zeh, Muteret B'zeh. Ditnan. Now he quotes the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah. Barishana Yumasin Masuot. Mishakilkelu Akutim Itkino Shiur Shluchin Yotzin. Okay, so it says originally they wouldn't send out messengers. They would light these bonfires at the top of the mountains, right? The Gemara, the Mishnayot in Rosh Hashanah describe how once the Beit Din established the moon, this was the quickest form of mass communication in those days. They would light bonfires at the top of the mountains, and they would see, describes people standing on each mountain. They would see from the previous one, and they would start lighting. Everybody would know when they would see these fires to very far away that the Beit Din had established Rosh Chodesh. What was the problem? That the Kutim came along and they wanted us to eat Chametz and Pesach. They wanted us to get it wrong, and they would light the fires on the wrong days. So therefore they couldn't trust us anymore. So Mishakilkelu Akutim, this was the fake news being spread. Right? Then they established that the messenger should go out from Beit Din. And this is where this whole problem of Yom Tov Sheni came from, because the messengers obviously couldn't get everywhere in time. The ilu bitlu kutim avdinan chad yoma. Right? Were it not for what the kutim did, and they were still able to light the fires and let everybody know, so then there would really only be 1 day. Avdinan chad yoma, right? And everywhere where the shluchim would arrive, there would be 1 day. In other words, says Abaye, you see from here that it's not that Chachamim established it as this is a fixed takana, that later on, yes, that there's a fixed takana that they have to be that the 2 days are like 1 long Yom Tov. It's only because there's a safek. It's only because there's a safek. And the fact is, if there's a place where there's not a safek, like, again, not because you're able to work it out, but there's not a safek because you're able to get the message in time from the Beit Din, either because the shlichim arrived there, or because if you didn't have this external problem with regarding the fires and the kutim, then you'd be able to tell. Therefore, it's a safek, and we treat it, even though we treat both days as Yom Tov fully, we do that with the understanding that inherently, in essence, one of them is not Yom Tov, one of them is not Chol, one of them is Chol. And therefore, for this idea of the Beitzah, that's later on 1 day, it can be consumed the next day. And just see Rashi on that. He says, let's see, where do we see? 'Cause Rashi says, Kvatei derav mistabra. He says, She'eno chok, ela midagat safek ichmirom aleim hagaluyot. The Chachamim did not make a takana. Essentially, what Rabbi is saying, or what Rabbi Zera is saying, is that Chachamim made a takana to say both days are intrinsically Yom Tov. Rabbi says no, it's not. They didn't make it a chok that both days are Yom Tov. They said in practice everybody needs to treat the second day as Yom Tov, but that's only because of the safek. So says Rashi Barishona, Kodem shekukulu akutim v'siu hey masuot b'yom shelo kavu bo chodesh. Right before the kutim, they would and what? How did they kilkulu? That they would put up their own fires on the wrong day, Israel, in order to cause people to Masin masuot. Okay, he's just explaining what Masin masuot means, to lift up these fires, quoting a pasuk, Sefer Shoftim. Tav'era v'Rosh Hashanah mefaresh lo. In Masechet Rosh Hashanah it explains. Through these fires, everybody would know hakrovim v'arachokim, those who were near, those who were further away, et kviat hachodesh, v'lo hayu osin el Yom Tov echad b'chol makom, and therefore they only did one day of Yom Tov everywhere. Shiur shluchim yotzim, when the shluchim would go out, v'ad makom shechol lagia b'toch 15 yom em modiim, to wherever they could go within 15 days, v'osin yom echad. Those places would do one day, and the other places would do 2 days. Now, 15 days is obviously because of Pesach. So you might say, what about Rosh Hashanah? Right? In Elul, they have 30 days maybe to get to the places. What about the places that are further away? So the Gemara says there was a gzerah of the places wherever the shlichim couldn't get in time for Nisan. So those places would have 2 days in Tishrei as well. Well, yeah, both ways. So that stage, that was mentioned, Shlechim Yotzim, right? The ilu bitlu kutim, says Rashi, if that would go away, so Adrin and Vavdin and Masechet Rosh Harim v'yidu hakol, we'd go back to putting up these fires, and everybody would know. Vavdechad Yoma would do 1 day. B'chol duchta, everywhere. Va'it nanami. Right, and he says, not only, says Abai, not only if we didn't have the issue with the kutim, then we go back and have 1 day everywhere, but even now, those places where the shlichim arrive within 15 days, they do 1 day. They've not now, at this point, established it as a takana for all generations. Okay, based on that, we say, and this is halakha and Shulchan Aruch nowadays as well, that if the egg is laid on first day Yom Tov, it is permitted on Yom Tov Sheni. Now the obvious question is, if that's the case, why nowadays, when we have a fixed calendar and we don't have a safek, do we still have to keep 2 days? So says the Gemara, 5 lines from the bottom, Ashtad yadinan b'kviyad yaucha, maitam avdinan tzlayome. Nowadays that we know when it's meant to be, why is it that we still keep 2 days? Mishum d'shachumita, that's talking in their days, right? Kal v'chomer for our days. So he says, Mishum d'shachumita, they sent from there, hize'aru b'minhag avotechem b'yadechem. This is a important principle of halakha, which we apply in many areas, but this is it. Be careful with the minhag of your forefathers, that earlier generations kept this minhag. We don't have the authority now to undermine it. And it gives a reason why they had to keep this minhag. Again, all of this in the Gemara is still talking. This is talking about the time. It seems to be when it says it's not that there's a fixed calendar yet. It's that even in the days before the fixed calendar, but everybody knew when Yom Tov would be. They knew when the Eidim could come and when Beit Din could declare the Chodesh. So why, nonetheless, do they say we still have to keep it? Because of Minhag Avotechem B'Yedechem, Zimnin the Gazra Malchut, there might come a time when there will be Gzerot, right? Zimnin of the non-Jewish nations, the non-Jewish rulers, the Gazra Malchut Gzera, V'ati Lekol Kule, and it will come to be they'll come to be a kilkul. Maybe as a result of persecution. And as a result of these Gzerot, you won't have anybody who will know how to work out the calendar. Says Rashi, the Gazra Malchut Gzera, Shelo Yitasku B'Torah, the Gzerah will be that you aren't allowed to learn Torah. As we know, unfortunately, it happened many times in our history. And as a result of that, let us go to the way to work out the calendar will be forgotten. And you'll come and do one day and you'll do it on the wrong day. You'll make a month which is meant to be chaser, maleh or maleh chaser. You'll have 29 instead of 30 days and vice versa. You'll come to eat chametz on Pesach. So that was the reason. And even if that reason doesn't apply, nonetheless, we still say, and that is why we still have the concept of Yom Tov Sheni. So now we get to the third case. 3 lines from the bottom. Says the Gemara, we're going to see this is fundamentally different. What happens when we have the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah? And that we know is fundamentally different. The reason being that Rosh Hashanah is on Rosh Chodesh, so it gets a lot more complicated. So Rav Shmuel Damri Tarvayu Noda Bezeh Asura Bezeh. Both Rav and Shmuel agree, but sometimes we find this in the Gemara. Rav and Shmuel were usually Bari Plukta. They usually argue with each other. Same thing, Abaye and Rava, or Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. So sometimes when the two Tanaim or two Amoraim who very, very often argue, we say both of them agree. Okay, both of them agree. So that's the way it is. Rav Shmuel Amri Tavayu Noda Bezeh Asura Bezeh. So Rav had said. So again, the first case, Rav was machmir regarding Shabbat and Yom Tov together. The second case regarding Yom Tov Sheni Shogaliot, Rav was maker. Now regarding the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, Rav is machmir once again, and we follow Rav in all 3 cases. Okay, why is he machmir over here? Titnan. We learn in a Mishnah. There's a Mishnah later on the Masechet and Masechet Rosh Hashanah, I think, as well. Barishana hayu makablim et chodesh kol hayom. So this is referring to the day of Rosh Hashanah. Now, for all the other Chagim, Pesach is in the middle of the month, Sukkot is in the middle of the month. Whatever happens, you can wait until after it's been Rosh Chodesh, a day or 2, and then you know on which day it's meant to be the Chag. On Rosh Hashanah itself, though, it is Rosh Chodesh. So what happens? You wake up in the morning or that night, right? It's just been the 29th of Elul. So now we know Rosh Chodesh can either be tonight or it can be tomorrow night. It can be one of those 2 days. Whichever day it is also going to be Chag, is also going to be Yom Tov, it's also going to be Rosh Hashanah. So any other Rosh Chodesh, so what's the nafkamina? It doesn't matter if you know or you don't know. You might find out halfway through the day that it is or it isn't. But here's Rosh Hashanah from the beginning of the day. You need to know. So what happens? So he says. So the Mishnah says like this: Barishana hayu makablim et chodesh kol hayom. That initially they would accept the witnesses who come in to say today is Rosh Chodesh the entire day, meaning you could get to you're close to Shkia on the day that might be Rosh Hashanah. We'll see in a moment what people did practically, but we still don't know if today's been Rosh Hashanah or tomorrow might be Rosh Hashanah. The Eidim come 5 minutes before the end of the day and they say, we saw the new moon. They say, okay, retroactively, we know that today has been Rosh Hashanah. That's how it was initially. Barishana yom makablim neidut hachodesh kol hayom. They would accept it the entire day. Pa'am achat nishtau ha'edim lavo. But it happened once that the Eidim came very, very late in the day, late in the afternoon. V'nitkalkalu ha'leviim b'shir. And what happened? The Leviim had the wrong shir shal yom that came with the korban. Because they were waiting in the afternoon. They said, okay, the witnesses haven't come yet. It must be Yom Chol. They did seemingly the shir of Yom Chol. There's a few different interpretations exactly what happened yet. They did the shir of Yom Chol. And then the Eidim came. They said, oops, actually today was not Yom Chol. Today was Yom Kodesh, was Rosh Chodesh, was Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, when this mishap occurred, they made a takana. Hitkinu, we're on the top of Daf Hey now. Hitkinu shelo yayu makablim et ha'edim ela ad mincha. So then they said, no, okay, this is ridiculous. We can't wait until 5 minutes before Shkia to know whether it's Yom Tov or not. We have to make a cutoff point. And the cutoff point will be mincha time, seemingly mincha ktana, which is 9.5 hours. So if the Eidim come until mincha, then we'll accept the testimony that today is Rosh Chodesh. If they come after mincha, doesn't matter. once they come after, once we get to Mincha and the Eidim have not come, we've established that tomorrow we will treat as Rosh Chodesh. Tomorrow we'll treat as Rosh Hashanah. Im ba'u Eidim Mincha u'lemala, noagin oto hayom Kodesh u'lemachar Kodesh. So then what happens if the Eidim actually come after Mincha time? So then we treat today as Kodesh and we treat tomorrow as Kodesh as well. In other words, you have a situation where the Eidim come sometime after Mincha. Therefore, you know intrinsically that today is actually Rosh Chodesh, and therefore the next day is a Yom Chol. But even though the next day is actually a Yom Chol, meant to be, you're still treating the next day as Rosh Hashanah. That was the takana they made. That if the Eidim don't come, so even though we know there's no safek at all, we know that today is meant to be Rosh Chodesh. Nonetheless, we treat tomorrow as Yom Tov as well. And therefore, that is the proof that you have a situation whereby the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, it's not out of safek. There is no doubt at all. We know that today was the day the new moon was seen. Nonetheless, we're going to keep tomorrow as Yom Tov, and therefore, we treat the 2 days. Notice this is Rav and Shmuel. There's no actually dissenting opinion at this point. That we treat the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, we look at them as Yoma Arichta. We look at them as one long day, and therefore an egg which is laid on the first day is not permitted on the second day. I just mentioned here as well, maybe similar to Rav Asi, but the other way around. We treat it as one long day l'chumra, but we don't treat it as one long day l'kula. If we had treated the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah as Yom Arichta l'kula, that would mean that you could prepare from one day of Rosh Hashanah to the next, but we can't do that. So we actually go l'chumra in both directions. Now, one other point here, when he says Nagin oto Yom Kodesh, Machal Kodesh, Rashi explains. Maybe next week we'll see it a little bit more inside. But Rashi explains here that either way, what would happen, practically speaking, is that you would, from the night, you would have to treat the first day, right, the 30th day of Elul, which may or may not turn out to be Rosh Hashanah. They would have to treat that as Rosh Hashanah. They'd go to shul and they'd say, because there's a safek. There's a safek that the witnesses might come, so we're treating it as if it is Yom Tov. Okay, if the witnesses come at any point in the day, then you say, great, we know you blow the shofar in the morning, everything. We say we know retroactively that we were correct in keeping it as Yom Tov, and we make Havdalah. Fine. If the witnesses don't come at all, okay, so this is normally Yom Tov Sheni, the Safek is on the second day. Here the Safek is actually on the first day. We say retroactively, we kept the day out of a Safek. We treated it as a Yom Tov. We now know it actually wasn't Yom Tov. It doesn't matter. Tomorrow's will be Yom Tov. We'll keep it as well. What about this intermediate case whereby the Eidim come after Mincha? So this is what the Gemara says. Yeah, no, Aginoto Yom Kodesh u'lemachar Kodesh. Meaning from the previous night, we've started to treat today as Rosh Hashanah, as Yom Tov out of Safek. Where now we hit Mincha. And we get to Mincha time and the Eidim have not come. Since the Eidim have not come, we know that now Beit Din has established that tomorrow is going to be treated as Rosh Hashanah as well. So we treat it today as Rosh Hashanah, we treat it tomorrow as Rosh Hashanah. Does that mean that in the time that's left, from Mincha until nightfall, we can now go and do Malacha, whatever? No, Rashi points out no. They would still have to keep that. That's why the Gemara says, no, Toa Yom Kodesh. You continue to keep that day as Kodesh. Why? So that in future years, people won't come to be Mezalzel. If you say from now on, from in this couple of hours you've got left, you can now do Malacha, and we're only going to relate to tomorrow as Yom Tov, what's going to happen the next year? We're going to get to the night. People are going to say, last year they told us that now these rabbis they said we've got to keep Rosh Hashanah now, but then the witnesses didn't come and the witnesses only come later, so the next day is Rosh Hashanah. No, so we'll do Malacha. In order that shouldn't happen, people shouldn't be Mazalzel. You still keep Yom Kodesh nonetheless, even though it's only going to be the next day that's actually treated as Rosh Hashanah, even though you know that that's not the day when the new moon was seen. Okay, Ad Kan.
Rabbi, is there any question about what date it is? Which day is Aleph Tishrei?
What do you mean in the case where
in the case where they come after Mincha?
Right. So seemingly, I mean, see, if they come after Mincha, the fact that they've come, so we have to see, I think Rashi addresses that point. But since they've come, so we know that the new moon was actually seen today. So it may well be that we still count it as Aleph, but the next day is regarded as Rosh Hashanah as well. That may explain, by the way, why it is nowadays that we have Rosh Hashanah on Aleph and Bet Tishrei. If the whole thing's out of a suffix, if the whole thing's you're not sure when is Rosh Chodesh, so maybe it should have been that it was Lamed and Aleph.
But if the witnesses don't come on the first day, then the second day is Aleph B'Tishrei.
Yeah. If the witnesses don't come on the first day, then it's clear that the second day will be Aleph. That's clear. But your question is if the witnesses do come after the mincha, so then we'll have to look at it, we'll have to discuss. Meaning how to what extent does the takana go? When we say that they made a takana that the next day is going to be Rosh Hashanah, does that mean the next day is treated as a Yom Tov? Or does that mean that the next day is also counted as Aleph? So that's not completely clear from what we've seen in the Gemara so far.
מושפעת ממספר ימי ההפסקה בלחימה. יש לנו